if I can wake up and say every morning, like, Lord, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, have mercy on me, a sinner, that I've sinned. If that's not a daily practice, then I'm going to become pretty brutal to people that offend me. But if it is a daily practice, my heart softens, and I can become much more generous to those who have offended me.
Welcome back to the Word on Fire show. I am Brandon Vaught, the Senior Publishing Director at Word on Fire. I'm joined here with Bishop Barron as we continue our discussion on forgiveness. A couple episodes back, we began by discussing an article by the popular Protestant pastor Tim Keller. His article was titled "The Fading of Forgiveness, Tracing the Disappearance of the Thing We Need Most." I've linked to the article in the show notes, and I encourage you to read it. Last time we spent all of our time on the first half of Tim's article, which was mostly diagnosing why we've lost this practice of forgiveness. So it was kind of negative and discouraging, but this discussion, we're going to focus on the second half, where he proposes how we can recover this lost practice, specifically as Christians. But before we get there, Bishop, exciting day at Word on Fire, because for the first time in a long time, we are launching a new film series and study program. This used to be our bread and butter over many years. We'd release one every single year. You could count it as on a clock, but the pandemic kind of slowed us down a little bit. But here we are back with a new program. This one is on the Creed. The Creed. It's a beautiful 6-part study program filmed at some of the most gorgeous California missions out there where you are. And it's accompanied by a great book titled Light from Light, Theological Reflections on the Nicene Creed, which you've been working on for some time. Tell us about both of these new resources.
Yeah, I'm excited about them. You say COVID in one way set us back, but it also allowed me to finish that book. I had begun that book a while ago, at the prompting, by the way, of Father Paul Murray. Some listeners probably know him, great Dominican spiritual teacher. He's at the Angelicum in Rome. And he had said to me on one of our trips over there, the next book you should write is on the Creed. And so I took that to heart. It had begun work, but then, I was caught up in all the million things I do here. But then COVID opened up a little more space. I had more time. And so I knuckled down and finished that book. And then once it was done, we went to 3 beautiful places, one in Montecito, one in Santa Barbara, and one in Ventura. And we filmed talks based upon the book. And, in the past, I always had an audience that I spoke to, but during COVID, we couldn't do that. So I did more of a direct-to-camera approach. So it's a, I think, beautiful-looking film. It'll be helpful in parish settings, adult education, RCIA. And the book, my hope, Brandon, is that that book, which I wrote at a pretty serious level, could be used at colleges, universities, maybe reintroducing a lot of people to Christianity. The reason I wrote the book is that I just am convinced a lot of people don't know what the Christian faith really is. They're going on caricatures and distorted understanding. So that's my hope for the film series, maybe in parishes especially, the book in universities, colleges. So anyway, I'm proud of it.
You can find everything at the website wordonfire.org/creed. There you can pick up the book, you can pick up DVD or Blu-ray versions of the film. But I also want to add that if you're a member of the Word on Fire Institute, you have instant streaming access to all of the film episodes right now. So if you're not a member of the Institute, that's a great reason to sign up. You not only get all the great stuff within the Institute and our Evangelization and Culture Journal, but you will also get access to this new Creed film. So sign up there at wordonfire.institute, or just to purchase the items individually, you can find them at wordonfire.org/creed. All right, let's get back to the topic of forgiveness. Again, last episode we discussed why forgiveness has faded out of practice today, but let's move on to how to recover it. So Keller begins by quoting Hannah Arendt, who is a well-known Jewish political philosopher writing after the Holocaust and wrote a lot about post-Holocaust issues. She had this very powerful line. She said, "The discoverer," with a capital D, mind you, "the discoverer of the role of forgiveness in the realm of human affairs was Jesus of Nazareth." Remember, a Jewish political philosopher making this recognition. The fact that Jesus made this discovery in a religious context, she says, and articulated it in religious language is no reason to take it any less seriously in a strictly secular sense. Do you agree with her, Bishop, that Jesus was the discoverer of the role of forgiveness in the realm of human affairs?
Yeah, I think so. Look at Tom Holland's book, Dominion, where he goes into this theme of how powerfully Christianity has influenced Western culture, and so deeply that we often don't even notice it. So we take certain values for granted that aren't just naturally in the human arena, but came precisely from Christianity. Look in ancient Greece and Rome. Would you say forgiveness of one's enemies are high values? No way. No way. Look, to be honest, in Judaism and Islam, forgiveness of enemies. Look in the Eastern religions. You don't find that stress, and you do find it indeed in the teaching of Jesus and then in the church. I'm not saying all Christians exemplify it. God knows we don't. But that Jesus is the inventor, the discoverer of this teaching, I'm with Hannah Arendt, sure.
So Kettler affirms there was a major turn when it came to forgiveness with the incarnation of Christ and his teachings on forgiveness. And he begins to sketch out this uniquely Christian view of forgiveness in 6 different themes. We're going to walk through them one at a time. The first one, he says, is that forgiveness in Christianity is a set of practices. He emphasizes it is not, therefore, primarily and originally an emotion. Forgiveness is granted before it is experienced. The practices can slowly shrink the internal anger over time, and that is a great good to be expected, he says. But forgiveness is practiced before felt, not felt before practiced.
He's a post-liberal. That's very much the language the post-liberal philosophers tend to use. Modernity is very much predicated upon the primacy of experience and the primacy of interiority, that the real me, this goes right back to Descartes, comes up clearly through someone like Kant. The real me is deep down in here. The real me is what experiences things deep down. The post-liberals recovered the more ancient sense of the body, of exteriority, of practice, of the public dimension of life. Hannah Arendt, by the way, was very sensitive to that. She was very sensitive to how the modern has departed from earlier ways of understanding, for example, our political life. And I'm very sympathetic with that. So I made sort of the post-liberal turn at one point in my life. I was trained very much in a liberal approach to theology. That's what my generation got. But I began to read those post-liberals and took that very seriously, that practice comes first, that you practice the faith. Another, by the way, interesting philosophical influence there is Wittgenstein. So Wittgenstein by the 40s and 50s is making that similar move in philosophy. So I'm very sympathetic with that forgiveness is something you do, not something you feel deep down within you. Now, there is a subjective dimension to it, which we can talk about, but it shouldn't be something I wait around to happen in here before I do anything. Rather, I quite agree with that, the opposite. I tend to do certain things which then produce in me certain changes, interior changes. But it's a set of practices. Look at my book years ago called The Strangest Way. At that point, I was reading Hauerwas and Baxter and Alistair McIntyre and Wittgenstein and many of the post-liberals. And that book is all about that. It's the 3 paths, these 3 sets of practices that we engage in. And I, in fact, included in that book forgiveness of enemies as one of the practices distinctive to Christianity.
It strikes me, Bishop, that this is a distinctive mark of Christianity in general, and not just the specific practice of forgiveness, that it's ultimately a set of practices, not fundamentally a set of experiences or beliefs. I talk to many atheists who say, like, I can't believe in God. And I say, well, like, what do you mean by that? They say, well, like, when I try to pray, I just don't feel anything. I don't feel like he's there. I don't have any sense that God is real. But it's this same proposal that, no, it's not fundamentally about your beliefs or your feelings, but if you, as C.S. Lewis said, if you put on the cloak of Christianity and try to live that way, then your feelings, emotions, beliefs often follow that engine.
Go back to someone like Hauerwas, we mentioned a couple times, whose father was a bricklayer, and so he often compares things to that, learning the craft and art of laying bricks. How do you become a bricklayer? You don't do it in a classroom. You don't cultivate interior feelings about bricklaying. You start laying bricks. and you make mistakes, and you submit to mentors, and you accept correction, and you try it again, and then you develop maybe your own style of doing it. That's a very Wittgensteinian sort of approach to things. It's also like the famous origin story I tell. You know, when Gregory Thaumaturgus came to him and said, I want to learn your doctrine. And he said, well, first come and live our life, and then you'll learn our doctrine from the inside. That's, I think, a very good Christian instinct. You do certain things. That's why, isn't it lovely that Christianity, go back to the Acts of the Apostles, is referred to as the way. So not church even, or not set of ideas or philosophy. It was a way. It was a way of life. Our doctrines at their best, it seems to me, come up out of the way of life. It's very interesting, isn't it, Brandon, that if one of the practices is forgiveness of enemies, what will that do to our beliefs? It will, in fact, affect our beliefs in a very deep way. But so I am very much with that. Practice comes first.
So that's the first quality of the Christian view of forgiveness, that forgiveness in Christianity is a set of practices. Tim Keller says the second quality is that forgiveness is always a form of voluntary suffering that brings about a greater good. Here's what he says. Whenever you are wronged, the perpetrator owes you. It may be literal and financial, but in any case, he or she has wrongfully robbed you of some good, whether of reputation or relationship or health or of something else. To forgive is to deny oneself revenge. It is a commitment to not to try to exact repayment from them by inflicting on them the things they did to you. It's the lex talionis we discussed last episode.
Yeah.
Therefore, he says, forgiveness is always costly to the forgiver. However, the profits, at least within your own heart and at best in the restoration of the relationship, the profits outweigh the cost. What do you think about that?
You know, look, if we're together. Now, those who are watching this can see what I'm doing. I have my hands together here. Two people are together. They're face to face. Well, then someone offends the other, right? And he absents himself. Well, in justice, the just thing is, well, come on, man. You broke the relationship. Well, heal it. You come back. But he doesn't. But forgiveness is now I take the initiative. Even though I've been the one offended, I'm going to pay this extra price by going the distance that he should have gone. I'm going to go to him to be reconciled. Costly? You bet. Certainly at the emotional level. And think of the pride you have to swallow to do that. Think of your sense of being a victim that you have to overcome. You are a victim, but you're not going to claim it as your honor. In fact, you're going to overcome that. It costs. Here's a connection. Actually, Keller makes it one of his sermons. I've always appreciated. Why do we say that God's forgiveness of the world happened through the cross of Jesus? Why couldn't God just forgive us, you know? Well, it's this principle, isn't it? Forgiveness, if it's real forgiveness, always costs the one who does the forgiving. We say that Jesus paid a price on the cross. There's a redemption involved, right? Is what we're seeing iconically on the cross the manifestation of the cost that God bore, the price that God paid in forgiving us, God's journey into our dysfunction and so on. So I like that. And the Christian's got to be willing to bear it for the sake of the world. And let me say this before I forget, Brandon. Remember, this is also big in the post-liberal thinkers. Christianity is not primarily for Christians. It's for the world. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world, Jesus says to the followers. It's not, oh yeah, thank you. I now have these wonderful spiritual principles so I can become a happy person. Well, in fact, you will become a happy person. But the point of your being a follower of Jesus is to bring others to Christ. You live your Christianity for the sake of the world, not for your own sake. You're a beacon unto the nations. And so as we fade away, see, that's the sad thing that I think he's identifying, the disaffiliation of so many. If Christians aren't in the world, those who are shaped by the cross of Jesus, we're not in the world, what's going to happen is the world's going to start going down these weird paths that we identified last time. And so people willing and able to pay the price of forgiveness start having a leavening impact on the world. As the Christian gospel is preached less and less, as the Christian life is publicly lived less and less, and that's, let's face it, what disaffiliation means, trouble for society will follow. So I want my fellow Christians listening to this to realize that you're not a Christian for yourself. You're a Christian for the world. You've been chosen by Christ, baptized and confirmed and drawn into his mystical body, not for your own edification, but that you might now become a lumen to the Gentiles, right? A light to the nations. So watch as forgiveness fades away, as a publicly lived reality, what takes its place? This fierce, honor, shame, brittle, hard-edged, violent society we have now.
Next, Tim Keller notes that forgiveness practices have an upward, an inward, and an outward aspect, and each of those three is crucial. So by upward, he means embracing divine forgiveness. Inward, he means granting yourself inward forgiveness. And outward, he means forging a reconciled relationship with others. And he says that if any of those dimensions lack forgiveness, it will become manifest in the other two dimensions as well. You need to have forgiveness present in all three relationships.
Absolutely. People forgive when they know they've been forgiven. Look, I've been offended. We're all offended all the time. Let's face it. You can't go through human life. You can't go through a day without someone offending you, especially now with our microaggressions. I'm offended every time I walk out the door. But see, if I bracket God, so I've never needed forgiveness, or there's no one to forgive me, well, then I'm going to become very harsh to those who are cruel to me. But if I have a deep, deep sense of, despite my having offended God over and over and over again, that I've been forgiven, well, if I have that sense, then I'm going to be much more generous as I reach out to other people who've offended me, So, again, if that fades away, I don't know if there even is a God, or if there is, I have no relationship to him. Well, then I'm never going to feel forgiven. And then I'm going to become, before you know it, a kind of barracuda to other people who are offending me. But if I can wake up and say every morning, like, Lord, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, have mercy on me, a sinner, that I've sinned. If that's not a daily practice, then I'm going to become pretty brutal to people that offend me. But if it is a daily practice, my heart softens, and I can become much more generous to those who have offended me.
You kind of anticipated Tim Keller's next point here. He says, forgiveness includes two inner resources that the experience of the gospel gives us for a life of forgiveness. First, he says, and this is the one you anticipated, realistic humility about your sin.
Yeah.
He says, those who won't forgive show that they have not accepted the fact of their own sinfulness. But if we can say, there but for the grace of God go I, if we recognize ourselves as more of a wretched sinner than others, forgiveness becomes easier. Second, he says, a joyful assurance of your acceptance in Christ. I thought this was so pastorally perceptive, that you can't be gracious to someone if you are mainly dependent on the approval of others to shore up your own weak sense of self-worth. But if you derive your self-worth from God, it frees you up to forgive others.
Yeah, no, they're both important points. I think of my mentor, Cardinal George, one of his famous quips. He's a bit like Chesterton that way, isn't he? Cardinal George had a lot of these little quips. He said, we live in a society that permits everything and forgives nothing. And I think of that a lot. It's dead right. So we pride ourselves on our toleration. I mean, everything's permitted. You're a man, you want to be a woman, okay, it's all right with me. Everything's tolerated. But then nothing's ever forgiven. And I think that's absolutely right. We're harshly critical of one another. Offenses are carefully counted up and remembered. Where does it come from, our capacity to forgive people, precisely from this point, that I have felt so forgiven in my own life? bracket that, it fades away. My capacity to be the least bit gentle to those around me also fades away. And see, a lot of that, Brandon, comes down to prayer, doesn't it? Because that's where you sense the forgiveness of God. Now, I say as a Catholic, par excellence in the sacrament of reconciliation, but also at every Mass. I mean, my venial sins are forgiven at every Mass. If every morning, and I pray the Jesus prayer every day, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, a sinner. Prayer is where we cultivate that sense of being forgiven. I stop praying. Where am I going to find that sense of being forgiven? And yeah, the self-worth thing too is so important. The whole world hates me. Well, okay, but if I'm loved by God, if God is for me, who can be against me, right? If that's where my sense of worth comes from, then I'm free. Then I'm free. I can accept this. That's like Ignatius of Loyola. I can accept, success and failure. I can accept wealth and poverty. I can accept they love me, they hate me. So what? Because my self-identity is not grounded in either of those situations. I've used that image of the center of the Wheel of Fortune. As the Wheel of Fortune changes, but I'm centered in Christ's love. Right, if I lose that, then I'm on the constant merry-go-round of the Wheel of Fortune. Or like, how am I doing in civil society? Well, for the moment, I guess they're not blaming me too much, or for the moment, I'm not being attacked, but tomorrow it could all change. But the love of God, I can live in the center of the wheel and then watch it turn. All of that is basic spiritual stuff.
Let's look at the last point Keller offers in his article. He says, as Christians, forgiveness is always our job. He says Matthew 5, Sermon on the Mount, tells us that we should go to someone if we know that they have something against us. Matthew 18 says we should approach someone if we know that we have something against them. In short, he says, if any relationship has cooled off or has weakened in any way, it is always your move. It doesn't matter who started it. God always holds you responsible to reach out to repair a tattered relationship. A Christian, he says, is responsible to begin the process of reconciliation regardless of how the distance or the alienation began.
Yeah, I love that. And, I think, Brandon, as you say that, so much of our attention today is focused on the past. What I mean is offenses that happened, in the past. And then someone goes, oh, yeah, but, that was prompted by an earlier offense. Oh, yeah, but that's only because someone else. Oh, yeah, but don't forget. And back we go, tracing the origins of the offense. In a way, it's like, look, that's Bluebeard's closet again. That's not going to get us anyplace. Rather, look, I know, terrible history. Blame can go all around. Let's move forward. Let's today, you and I, move forward. And I'm going to take a step. And I know, we can argue till the cows come home about the past and who caused this. Finally, who cares? Who cares? Let go of it. Let's move forward. Think of Jesus, but the one that sets his hand to the plow doesn't look back. You set your hand to the plow and you move forward. And so, seek reconciliation. Don't be dissuaded. Don't be distracted by a constant reference to this sort of never-ending history of offense. But right now, today, move forward. I think that's very wise.
All right, Bishop, let's close with this. We've spent 2 episodes now, almost an hour, talking about forgiveness.
Yeah, but it's really important, though. It's really important because it is central to the Christian, even say ethics, to me, is almost too dismissive. It's central to the Christian way. Jesus made it so basic to his articulation of what his followers should be about. So I think it's very important that precisely as Christians we become students of forgiveness. We become expert in it, and then better and better teachers of it to the wider world. So anyway, it's great that we're spending this much time.
Let me close with this question. I'm sure as a priest you've been in this situation countless times, but suppose someone comes to you either in spiritual direction, in the confessional, and they admit that they're harboring deep anger, resentment, or hurt towards someone who wronged them, who no doubt about it committed a wrong against them. And they say to you, how can I forgive this person? What can I do? It seems like there's just no way forward. what do you recommend to a person like that?
First, to pray. You can always pray. You can always pray that you might become more forgiving, but pray for that person. So pray for those who maltreat you, Jesus says. So even if, look, I can't bring myself to talk to that person, okay, maybe as a first step, though, in the privacy of your prayer, Lord, bless, now fill in the blank, whoever that person is. Maybe at the end of the day, as you're going to sleep, Lord, bless all the people I love and bless my enemies too. But pray, that's the first step. But then second, I go back to my post-liberal instinct to do something. It's a practice. Not to wait around for the feelings to come online, because who knows. But send a note, send an email, make a phone call, write a letter if you're very low tech, but do something. Reconcile, means the cilia, the eyelashes come back together again to be reconciled. You're separated. All right, make a move. Oh, the person didn't respond. Yeah, okay. You can't control that. But do something simple. Phone call, email, note, a letter. But even prior to that, pray. I would take those first couple of steps and then see what happens.
Well, it's time now for a question from one of our listeners. We love hearing from you guys, so if you have a question for Bishop Barron, you can send it in to us at the website askbishopbarron.com. Today we're hearing from Declan, who lives in England, so another of our international listeners, and he's got a question for Bishop Barron about the Bible. Here's Declan.
Hello, Bishop Barron. My name's Declan. I live in England. Can you tell us what is for you the most annoying passage in the Bible? Thanks.
Yeah, I'd have to know maybe more precisely what you mean. Like one that bugs me emotionally or one that I'm challenged by the most. I'm tempted to say, Brandon, maybe it's God's answer to Job. When God first says, where were you when I made the heavens and the earth? Because like so many other people, I identify with Job in his suffering and calling God into the dock and asking God. And I've written and preached on this answer over and over again. I believe it. It's extremely important. But nevertheless, I guess at some level, I do, as just from a human standpoint, find that a little bit annoying when God says, well, where were you when I made the heavens and the earth? Well, yeah, all right, Lord, I know, but I still would kind of like an answer, So, but what's interesting about that, cool about that question, is I think that's good. Find the very things in the Bible that annoy you. And as I've said before, the old adage of, where you stumble, that's where you should dig for treasure. So what trips you up? What bugs you in the Bible? Okay, that's where you need to dig and you need to ask and keep searching. So maybe that's it. Maybe I find that annoying, but that's okay. It doesn't mean I'm right and the Bible's wrong. It just means I chafe at that. And maybe that's one reason why I've spent a lot of time with that passage and thought about it and preached on it and so on. So maybe that's it, but that's an interesting question.
I know a lot of people would probably respond to that question by referencing one of the passages we've been discussing over the last two episodes, namely that we're to forgive our enemies. That seems to be the most challenging moral command Jesus gives. Would you say that's the case? Yeah,
probably. Enemy love, which in the sermon is the greatest test of love. And it's so counterintuitive. It runs contrary to our instincts. Yeah. So where you stumble, that's where you dig for treasure.
Well, thanks for joining us for this two-part episode on forgiveness. I wanted to remind you one more time about the launch of two exciting resources. First is our brand new 6-part film and study program called The Creed, beautifully filmed across the California Santa Barbara missions, where Bishop Barron goes over the basics of the faith as articulated in the Creed. You can find out more about that at wordonfire.org/creed. The second new resource tied to it is his book, the companion book titled Light from Light, Theological Reflections on the Nicene Creed. if you've got a high schooler or a college student curious about Christianity, I would go so far as to say this is the book you want to give them, because it's a smart, detailed overview of the basics of what Christians believe and why. So check it out. Again, it's titled Light from Light. You can find that and the film at the website wordonfire.org/creed. Well, thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time on the Word on Fire show.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I invite you to share it and to subscribe to my YouTube channel.